Hi, good morning. I'm Ellen Janzen, and our topic is grit and resilience. And we're going to ask the question about grit. Is it good enough? Is grit good enough? Let's start with a definition because you may not realize that grit has been studied and researched and is actually a thing. So if you look in the dictionary, they come up with a pretty good definition there. Courage and resolve, strength of character. And then they give this sentence as the example. I like this sentence a lot. He displayed the true grit of a Navy pilot, not just any good pilot, but a Navy pilot. Angela Duckworth is the researcher that took this idea of grit to a whole new level. She noticed that students in her high school class didn't necessarily excel according to their talent or in their intelligence, but according to this quality that they had. And she came up with a formula of passion plus perseverance equals grit. And using that, she went on to do research that proved this idea that natural talent did not necessarily get you as far as grit did. So that's really good news, because if you're not good at something, you can actually persist in it and become excellent. So her work began with children, first of all, maybe high school, maybe back into grade school. Then she extended it into college students, postgraduate, graduate. And then as she went along, she extended it further into business. And she was talking a lot about success. What does it take for somebody to succeed? And in those small categories of academics, success is very clearly defined. But as you get out into life, into other areas, it's not as defined. And in business, how would you define success? Happy employees or lots of money or both? So she began with, that was her trajectory that she began with. And she noticed that something that kept showing up was that the people with grit had purpose. So purposefulness was a big part of it. She said that was the highest correlation. So for me, I find that when I think about grit and talk about grit, I like to put that right into the formula, that passion plus purpose gives you that great perseverance. The other thing that Angela noticed was that grit inevitably increases with age, that you'll see a much lesser portion of it with children. And inevitably, as people get older, if they have grit, their grit gets more and more prominent in their character. Now, what's really interesting in how she researched, to me, this is very interesting, is that she only does self-assessment. She doesn't give out a questionnaire and say, get 5 people who know you to answer these questions. But she asks the person, do you like to finish what you start? Do you have grit? So this whole area of how do we assess ourselves, we want to come back to that a little bit and look at it at the end again. It is a big question mark around things. Now, the other thing that I noticed in Angela Duckworth's work is she started out talking about success, and then she moved to talk about excellence, which is kind of a little bit different. And she started to refer to the work of Anders Ericsson, another researcher who went all around the world. And he just found people who had reached a very high level in whatever they were doing. So some of those things require a high level. Surgeon. You can't be a mediocre surgeon. Well, I guess there are a few, but you get weeded out. Most of the mediocre surgeons get weeded out. People in dance, it's really obvious who has excellence in dance. They're the ones that go on to a big career in dance. So he studied everything from music, dance, the arts, aviation, writing, acting, chess, surgery, firefighting, lots and lots of disciplines. And he found that there were certain things, certain habits that were the same across all of these countries and all of these disciplines. So Ericsson was looking at what makes an expert. And in fact, that is the title of the paper that I read, Making of an Expert. And he found 4 similarities. The first one is that people who become an expert, who reach this level of excellence, have put in deliberate practice. And by that, he means they're practicing something, but with very specific micro goals, goals for little things to change and improve. So you would see that in athletics. You would see maybe an athlete improving their stride and making little changes, and every day trying to leap forward just a little bit. Or they might be trying to change their start time. So that then again, you have a micro goal. The second one is focus. The question he would ask is, are you really focusing on what you're doing? Or are you doing it over and over? Are you playing the piano? Are you playing the same piece of music? You know it quite well, so you just play it again. Or are you fully engaging your focus in what you're doing? The third one is, are you getting information rich feedback? And what that often amounts to is criticism. Is somebody telling you, oh, do this better? Oh, try this. Oh, that wasn't working for you. And then the last one is immediately going back and trying it again. So there's a little freebie from Anders Ericsson. If you've got a goal and you're working on it, you can check those things out and they might help you. I personally felt really encouraged at the thought of those little advances every day count. What he also came to was that it's going to take you about 10 years to become an expert. I've been struggling with marketing for the last 4 years. And this whole study made me think, oh, I have made some advances. I'm so encouraged. And it also made me realize, oh, I need to look at a 10-year goal here. I've been expecting that in 2 or 3 weeks, I might become quite good at this. So that was a freebie for me. So I'm going to look at a pilot as a case study for just a minute, because I grew up with my dad as a pilot, and there was this phrase that I would hear all the time, the right stuff. He would go visit pilots in the evening. If they have a choice of who to visit, they will go visit pilots. And my dad would sit around chatting with pilots, and I would go along with him, and I'd hear this phrase, the right stuff. Then when I got to college, my dad was actually the chief flight instructor at the college I was studying in. And I knew that at the end of the first semester, all of the instructors would get together and they'd look at the new guys and they'd decide if they had the right stuff. And beyond that phrase, at that time, pilots didn't actually define what they were looking for because they all knew what it meant. I think that it meant grit. I think it meant that they were looking at the guys who were going to engage fully, who had the ability to focus on their goals, and who had that capacity to take criticism and go back and repractice. Because when there's a tough skill, you might need to just turn the airplane around and do it again, over and over and over again. And they were looking for grit. The other thing that plays into this as a good example is that it's a life and death situation. You get it really wrong and you're in big trouble. Maybe not today, but if you get this wrong in the long run as a pilot, there are lives at stake. So people really do focus in and do their best to get things right. But what about resilience? We're going to talk about resilience. So let's start that here. What about a pilot who has lots and lots of grit? And I think we know somebody. I know somebody, I think you probably know somebody who has lots of grit, but somehow has become quite rigid and doesn't necessarily have resilience. And what do I mean by resilience? So let's go there right away. When we go to define resilience, it really comes down to a psychological ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis or to return to a pre-crisis state quickly. But if your pre-crisis state is not healthy, that's not helpful. So we want to look at resilience a little bit broader than that today. I like to use the work of child psychologist Gordon Neufeld, a fellow Canadian. He uses this definition: a capacity to return to optimal functioning or to thrive under duress. And he makes this statement about resilience. Resilience is the close cousin of empathy. So when he looks at resilience, he looks at the whole well-being of the person emotionally, mentally and emotionally. How is this person doing? Not just at, are they bouncing back from a hardship? Are they coming back up to even where they were? And I love that because we have a whole culture of people who may not be normal has become stressed rather than what is our optimal. So we're looking at what's our optimal. So I'm going to run back to Duckworth for a minute here and say that there was a surprise that came up in some of the studies. So they took a study that specifically looked at people with grit. Do they have resilience? Now, I don't know how many times they studied this, but in this one study of a significant number of people, it was found that actually resilience wasn't correlated with grit, and that in fact, it was an inverse relationship. So the more grit you had, it was possible the less resilience you had. That means that you do run a good chance of becoming rigid when you focus on grit. And what we want out of life is actually to have that grit that has the resilience factor. Duckworth talks about a word that she discovered from Finland, that the Finnish have this idea that if you dig deep inside yourself, you'll find something, a little extra something of courage or of determination to get you through a hard point, an obstacle. That is certainly part of resilience. It's called sisu. She says you dig deep, you get what you need, you get through to the next success. That is certainly part of resilience. But what I want to talk about today is a much bigger picture than that extra jump that you need from within yourself that quite often you can get to get over an obstacle, but resilience is a lot more than that. I'm going to talk about resilience by starting at the point of relationship, because if there's anything in life that I would choose as what would I call success, what would I say at the end of my life, I want to be known for success in something, it would be relationship. And there's research about that. You've probably heard about it, that they researched old people, and this came up. What will give you a sense of satisfaction when you get to the very end of your life? And the top thing is that I did relationship well. When I think about excellence and success, I always want that to have that context of relationship. Not that you can't be a great piano player or a great surgeon, but that the context of your life needs to include how our relationship's going. I'm going to read a quote from Brene Brown because she's inspiring and she says it really well. Connection is why we're here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and without it, there is suffering. I stop for a minute to think about grit, and I think it gives purpose, yes, and meaning. But what if the people around us are suffering from our grit? Then we're really not doing a good job of life. And I think that resilience is part of the answer to that when you put it into the context that Gordon Neufeld gives us of the whole picture of emotional well-being. Before we go deeper into that emotional side, let's take a look at resilience in athletes. And to get a better look at this, I called my friend who is, she's a superstar of coaches. Her name is Linda, and she's a fantastic coach. And her whole story is an intriguing look at resilience. And the first thing she said is, I think the word that we use for athletes is durability. And that was a great aha moment, because that's exactly what we want from resilience is durability. I love athletics as a field to look at because the psychological part is so fascinating as well as the physical. But the example that she gave me was a typical child who has been put in skating. Remember, I'm in Canada. We have lots of winter sports up here. And they've started when they're 4 years old, and they've practiced tons and tons and tons of specific skills for skating. And they get to puberty and their body is changing. And suddenly their coach realizes, oh, we need some special coaching now. And Linda sees a lot of people this way, a lot of young skaters. And she says they've just been too specific. They've built up this strength in their muscles in their legs, and they don't have the core strength that they need, but they also don't have the shoulder strength that they need for turns, for the spins. And so one of the first things that she does is she gives them a task of bouncing a ball against a wall really hard and then catching it. And she says a typical thing that she sees is that this child has great control of their legs and great muscle strength, but in their upper body, even if they can throw the ball really hard, it comes back to them and they haven't even learned to catch a ball. They've been so specific in their early life that they haven't learned these basic skills. And what we want to do, what her goal is to get kids to get a broad spectrum of skills and capacities and then become good at something very specifically. I think that does relate to resilience. I think that relates to us going back to our own resilience and saying, well, did I learn resilience as a child? Did I develop good resilience? And if I didn't, yes, I can go back to the beginning stages and gain those skills. Another interesting thing Linda said is that she sees a lot of parents coddling their children and keeping them from the risks, keeping them from the things that might not go well. And actually, that is a key point of resilience. You need the practice in the little ways at failure so that you become good at getting through it, getting over it. So that was a free bonus from Linda. And her story is fascinating. So I'm hoping we can get her to come and join us one of these days. I wanted to hear what she would say. And she said, yeah, family is really the strength that we work from. And the reason I mention that is because the people doing the trauma research these days, this is what they're coming to. They're coming to this conclusion that if we have a really strong relationship from our early childhood, preferably with our family, because that's who we go home to every night, but from anyone, if any one person creates a very strong relationship with a child, that is going to put them into a place where they can have resilience. And that's a key to resilience is relationships. So let's take a little bit more of a look at that now. Moving into a new parameter for what is success and what is excellence. And we're saying that it's relationships where you're living wholeheartedly, where your emotional and your mental and your social well-being are all considered as part of what is success and excellence. And I have another great quote from Brene Brown that I'll read to you. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. So that's actually kind of the opposite of grit. Is like, I'm not going to focus on everything has to get done. I'm going to focus on putting my whole heart into it and having compassion. And compassion always means somebody else is included. So let's go to that statement by Gordon Neufeld that empathy and resilience are close cousins. And let's take a quick look at what he means by that. Both of these things, empathy and resilience, are part of emotional maturation. If we are maturing as a human, we are going to embrace and move through our emotions. We're not going to try and hold them back or try and repress them and not feel what's going on inside of us, because emotions are an essential part of being human. Our emotions actually rise into our muscles. They get into our bodies. They come from our instincts and they come in waves. and the waves come up and down. And if we know what our emotional makeup is like, we trust that where there's an up, there's going to be a down. More importantly, we trust that when there's a down, we're going to come back up. And we let that happen in a way that energizes us for living. When we believe that about emotions, when we believe that they're essential, when we believe that they move us, when we believe that there is a wave that's going to come and go, we respond differently. We aren't afraid of them. We are willing to work with them. And that's a huge part of resilience. The ability to be self-aware, to name our emotions, to talk about them, that's a huge piece of resilience. It's actually that thoughtfulness is at the heart of resilience. So we want to be able to put our emotions out there as feelings that we can talk about, put our emotions where we can name them and reflect on them. And that's when we start to develop resilience. So as we take that initiative to notice our emotions, to give them words and to feel them, it's going to open us up to this capacity to care about ourselves. Caring about something is a pretty soft, vulnerable emotion. Gordon Neufeld names that as a soft emotion, a soft place. If we look around at teens, we'll see that a lot of them are shirking emotion. I don't care. That's their way of coping. That's not a healthy place to be with your emotions. You want to be able to care about yourself and about others. But the one thing that you need in order to have those vulnerable, soft emotions is a safe place, a safe emotional place to be in a relationship. You need someone who isn't going to judge you, someone who isn't going to step on you or be aggressive or attack you for who you are. And that's the key to having your vulnerable, soft heart. It's in those relationships where we feel safe that our own feelings can be seen and reflected on. That capacity for self-awareness, that ability to be seen, to see our own emotions, that's the bedrock of being able to see somebody else's emotions. If you don't know your own feelings, then when somebody else is feeling something, you really don't have the eyes to recognize what it is that they're going through. And that's why I believe he says resilience and empathy are the close cousins. That when we face our own emotions and care about our own emotions and learn to move through them, that's going to give us the capacity to care for somebody else's emotional state, to care about what's happening to them, and to be patient enough for what they need in their obstacle that they're facing, whatever they're facing emotionally. The second piece that he puts with the care is a piece he calls consideration. I'm not just going to care about your emotions, but I'm going to consider them. I'm going to consider your point of view. And he says this is part of resilience as well, because I'm not just going to look at my own pathway and what I want to achieve, but I'm going to consider what is happening in your pathway. And when we can do those two things, when we can have, on the one hand, this is what I want, this is how I feel, this is my priority. On the other hand, you have something that you need, something that is important to you, that you value. And when we bring them together, that's consideration. He says care and consideration are at the heart of resilient relationships. I'm going to stop for a second there and just say that if you're trying to achieve this with children, you need to know that their brain doesn't develop the capacity for consideration. Literally, that part of the brain hasn't developed that capacity until the age of 6, 7, or 8, around that age. It's really important to know that so you're not trying to impose that onto a child who isn't capable of it. When we put those two things together, care and consideration, that's when we have empathy. One of the hardest emotions for us to hang on to or to move into is the emotion of sadness. And what we need from a relationship when we're learning to deal with sadness is comfort. We need a relationship that's safe and stable, predictable, but that gives us comfort when we're sad. Another word for resilience might be adaptability. To be able to adapt to something that is difficult, an obstacle that we can't fix. We can't meet the goal that we want to meet, or we can't get the thing that we want in the moment that we want it. We're going to face futility. And to adapt to that, what we need is our sadness about it. This is a key to human maturation of emotions. The ability to feel our sadness and to let the tears literally wash through our brain and take out some toxins and find another way through. When we have someone in a safe relationship that gives us that comfort, it allows us to feel those feelings of sadness and to move back to joy. It allows us to feel the loneliness and move back to belonging, or frustration and move back to productivity. Those are all really important things. We feel fear and anxiety, and we need a place, a safe place to process that and move back to a calm spot. Those are key things to resilience, having that safety to feel those difficult emotions, the scary emotions, and come back to the place where we're calm and able to go on. It's also very, very key to have a safe relationship where we can rest. When we do go through that hard time, when we go through the bottom of the wave and we come back up, we do need rest. That's essential for growth, is that we do have a place and a time to rest. And we need a place to play. Our brains grow when we're at rest and when we're at play. So we look at that word and we think about children, and we can actually learn a lot from that. They go into this suspended bubble where the outcome doesn't matter. The goal doesn't actually matter. They're not working to achieve excellence. They're just in the bubble, and they're discovering what makes them fizz inside, or they're discovering what has maybe frustrated them. That's another thing that happens, is emotions get played out in play. What child developmentalists have noticed is that the relationship that children have with their caregivers that makes them feel safe gives them the rest that they need so that they can enter into play well. And when children are in that place of play, when they are in a bubble that is suspended from real life, from real outcomes, from the stress of life, that's when their brain really starts to knit together. So we're not really just talking about children. We need to talk about ourselves. What if we notice that we're becoming a little bit rigid, or that we don't have all of our feelings, or that we don't work out all of our feelings well? How do we as adults play? And the first question to ask is, do I have a place to go to rest? Do I know how to rest? Do I have relationships built around me that give me that security and that place of feeling safe so that I can explore my emotions? These are important questions that stack on each other, because when we see that happening, when we see children going to rest and then going to play, the process is in the design. The design of our brains is that is going to work for them. They are going to learn those things. They are going to mature. And as adults, if we go back and build the foundation first and give ourselves a chance, the design will work for us as well. So there are 3 signs that Gordon Neufeld says we can look for to see if we have resilience. Do you have the capacity to have your feelings? Are your feelings dwarfed, or can you really enter into feelingfulness? How about the capacity for rest? Do you have the capacity for rest? Do you know how to rest? And thirdly, do you have the capacity for play? Do you have things that just take you away? Could be music, could be art, could be fishing. Uh, it could even be a game that you play. Certain games online will do that for you. Often they really have an outcome and you're really focused on winning or losing, but some of them don't, and they could take you there. So what if you didn't have that as a child? What if you didn't have a childhood where you felt safe and you got into that bubble and you got into that zone of play? What if you had a childhood that you were sort of pushed towards grit and always trying harder and always looking at the goal and the outcome? How do you know if you have grit with or without resilience? Well, first of all, it's never too late. Uh, Absolutely never too late to start something again and to build it from the ground up. Here's a few thoughts about grit and resilience and looking at them side by side. With grit, we have someone who has a passion. They're passionate about something. With resilience, if you're full of your feelings, you will know what you're passionate about. So there's no conflict there at all. The passion in resilience will also show up in your play. It's not just about achieving. That may be true. Grit and resilience aren't mutually exclusive. You may be very gritty and you may have that feelingfulness as well. That's great. In grit, you're going to be very persistent. What I love about play is that it naturally sponsors that persistence. If you watch a child play, they will naturally do things over and over again. If you ask them to do something over and over again, they probably don't want to. But if you watch them playing, there's something inside of them that just, it springs up from within, a sense of practice and doing it over and over. What about focused? Well, grit, that's the thing. You're very focused. In play, you get to choose your focus. You focus where you want to, but that's the essence of play, is that you just get pulled right into what you're doing and you enjoy it so much, you're in the bubble. One of those elements of grit was that you're able to take feedback. I think there's gritty people who can't take feedback. And I think that's one of the key points where we can see, has that grit become a drivenness and an inability to be flexible and have that durability? With resilience, you have your feelings. So if somebody comes to you with a criticism, with a harsh word, whether it's fair or unfair, if you have your capacity to be sad about it and then to move on, that is how resilience can be differentiated or defined within. We can't say that grit and resilience are mutually exclusive at all. You can definitely have both. But that is one of the key features that's going to differentiate resilience. You're going to be able to feel your sadness, feel your disappointment, feel that things have gone wrong, and find another way through at times. In grit, you want to be fed by the feedback and get immediate improvement. That was what Erickson found with his research, is that people took the feedback and immediately got to the next task and got better at it. So it might be that you're actually fed by improving. That might fulfill your sense inwardly. With resilience, I think you're going to be fed by the relationship. I think that you don't need to always succeed in order to be fed, because when you're in a safe and feeling full in a relationship where you feel safe and you can have your emotions, that actually gives you a great sense of satisfaction. So that might be another difference between grit and resilience. What is it that gives you that sense of satisfaction? The last two things that I think set resilience apart from grit is that your long-term goal, your long-term outcomes of excellence may be secondary to your relational value. You'll see your relationships as so valuable that you wouldn't want to harm them. You wouldn't want to hurt them in order to get your task done. I think that's a key to how resilience is going to be different than grit. And the other part of that is that you won't let people around you be unnoticed. If you hurt them, you'll actually notice, because you have that key piece of empathy. You care about your own feelings. You care about other people's feelings. You feel the feelings that they're having when they're getting hurt, and you consider them. That's a key part of resilience. So we're starting to see that, yeah, you can have resilience with grit, but you may actually not want to have as much grit if you're in a really strong, good, resilient relationship. So I started out looking at grit, thinking to myself, well, how good is grit? How important is grit? Is grit good enough? And I found somebody else who asked the same question. happens to be Howard Gardner, who is the author of the idea, the creator of the idea of different multiple intelligences. So you may have heard of him. And he says this, and I'm quoting him, it's not a perfect quote: "Grit alone is not enough. You have to work ceaselessly to make the grit in service of the good." I think what he's saying there is your grit has to service something bigger than itself. And he's looking for what is good. And I'm putting it into a context where I say connection is good, relationship is good, caring for another person is good. So, what does grit without resilience look like? First quality is that it's a drivenness. There's a need to succeed, just to push through and get that success. Even if it's a small success, you're going to push everything aside to get to it. The second quality is you may not have all those rich relationships around you, because in resilience, you're going to have feelings, and feelings are going to connect you to other people necessarily. Grit without resilience might also be that lack of capacity to care, or to show consideration, empathy for other people. For yourself, it might lack the capacity to stop and grieve your losses, to actually feel the sadness of the disappointment when things don't work. It might be a fear that if you stop and grieve, you might not get up and go again. It might be the lack of capacity to rest and play. If you don't know what you do to rest, you might want to ask a few questions around that. And it may be a lack of an alternate solution. You may not be able to see, oh, there's another way through this. You may be so driven and so single-minded that you just have to keep going at it without saying, maybe I should try something different. So I'm going to leave you with a few questions you might want to ask yourself to explore this. This is not a questionnaire. If you want to know if you have grit, you can go look up Angela Duckworth and do her self questionnaire. I said I'd come back to that subjectivity. You might want to ask yourself these questions. If you're brave enough, you might also want to ask a few friends to answer these questions honestly about you. So the first one is, am I a finisher, a high achiever, an overachiever? That's one question. Secondly, do I check in on my own feelings and reflect on them on a regular basis? How good am I at that? Am I able to rest? How do I rest? What do I do when I rest? Another question, how easily can I see another person's point of view? Can I see things through their eyes? And am I able to make choices in their favor? How easily do I lean on somebody else? Do I always have to lead and make the decisions, or do I let somebody else make the decisions and lead sometimes? How hard or easy is it for me to find an alternate way through an obstacle? Do I get stuck on the one way, or can I find a second way? And now I'm going to come to one of the toughest questions and one of the deepest questions. Am I able to receive comfort? When things are really tough, do I have enough of my soft feelings that I can receive comfort? Am I really aware of my own vulnerable feelings? And if I'm aware of them, who do I share them with? So if you haven't guessed, there's no right and wrong answers to those questions. It's not that you have to get it right or do it right. It's more that you want to engage in those things to make sure that you're growing as a human being, that you're coming to that place of living wholeheartedly. And if you've read anything by Brené Brown or a trauma psychologist or anybody at all, this is a process. And if we go back to Erickson, we should be saying to ourselves, okay, wherever I am, maybe it's going to take me 10 years if I'm going to focus on my own resilience and get better at it. There's a little bonus from Anders Ericsson. I said earlier that I think we all know somebody who has grit. I think we also all know somebody who is resilient. And so maybe just taking the time to look at those two things and consider them for your life. You don't have to give up grit in order to be resilient, but it's a great way to start to look at What is it that I consider to be success? What do I want to say at the end of my life? What do I want people to say about me? And to grow wholeheartedly with the time that we have. Thanks for watching. It was fun to be with you. See you next time.